Hey everyone, welcome to the second tutorial in my intermediate piano course. I got some fantastic feedback about the first tutorial, so I hope you like this one just as much. If you haven't seen that first tutorial in the series, by the way, you'll find a link to it in the description text right underneath this video, along with a playlist link that I'm going to use for all of the lessons in the series. Today we're going to be looking at the second part of the piece, Chaconne, that we started studying in the first lesson, and use that as a starting point to explore some of the more advanced concepts we're going to have to deal with around using the piano's pedals and playing in a rubato style. For this lesson you're going to need to use the PDF that we used last lesson, so if you don't have that immediately to hand, then just head over to billspianopages.com/intermediate and you can download it right now. There are just a couple of bits of housekeeping we need to deal with before we get started. First of all, if you're watching this, you're probably already subscribed to my YouTube channel, but if you're not, just hit the red subscribe button and also the all-important bell notification icon so you get updated every time I release a new tutorial. You can also follow me on Facebook, Twitter and Instagram. The links to all of those are below. Now, in that first tutorial I also mentioned that it would be really cool if you could support my crowdfunding page at patreon.com/BillHilton. Supporting me on Patreon doesn't cost very much and it comes with loads of benefits, like access to my piano packs, which are full of extra exercises, original pieces and other stuff that will really help you to develop your piano skills. I've got a really good, really lively and friendly community of people growing on Patreon, and I always give my Patreon supporters priority when it comes to answering questions and giving help and guidance. So I think you'll really like it. Please do check out patreon.com/BillHilton. Something else I need to mention is your scales and exercises. Don't think I'll ever forget about those. You might remember that in the first tutorial in the series I asked you to focus on getting your existing scales and exercises up to a good standard, and all of the ones I expect you to know were included in the first lesson's PDF. The message today is keep working on those, because in the next tutorial, in tutorial number 3 in the series, we're going to have a close and detailed look at how to get the most out of your scales and exercises, and also think about how they fit into your practice routine. Okay, so now let's take a detailed look at the second part of Chaconne. The first 16 bars contain quite a few things to challenge you, and I hope you've been making good progress with those, but the rest of the piece, starting from bar 17, measure 17, is a little bit different in character. We've got this waltz theme beginning to appear. And although the original themes return towards the end, the overall challenges we're going to be dealing with are just a little bit different. So first of all, let's remind ourselves how it sounds. Rather than listen to the whole piece over again, we're just going to hear the section we're going to be working on today, though obviously if you do want to hear the whole piece at any stage, just head back to the first tutorial. So here we go, fading in from bar 17. So first off, let's have a look at the overall structure and style of this section of the piece. There are two main differences going into this section compared to the first section. First of all, the time signature has changed from 2-2 to 3-4, so we now have 3 beats in the bar, and each beat is a crotchet, a quarter note long. 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, and that lasts until bar 69, measure 69, where 2-2 time returns for 4 bars. And that holds until bar 73, when we go back to 3-4 time for the final 10 bars of the piece. So you have to practice switching from time signature to time signature, counting in 2s, then in 3s, while changing tempo at the same time. I'll talk about tempo in a second. All that switching around sounds difficult, but if you have your wits about you, it's not actually too bad. If in doubt, listen to the full playthrough from the first tutorial. Remember that the playlist link is below, and just work out how I handle it. This section from bar 17 is also quicker. It's marked allegretto, which suggests a tempo that is brisk without being really mad, and it also carries a sense of something that should be played with kind of lightness and grace. That tempo holds until bar 69, okay, where we also change to the 2-2 time, and there we get a meno mosso marking, which just means play a bit slower. We had a meno mosso in the first section as well, and that takes us back to something that's a bit closer to the tempo at the start of the piece, although I've taken care not to specify that it's not exactly the same tempo as the start of the piece. If I wanted to do that, I would have used the marking tempo primo, first tempo, but I didn't do that because I didn't want it quite that slow. I want a sense of continuing movement here, of pushing through to the end of the piece. We've also got some repeats, so from the start of this section in bar 17, measure 17, where the new time signature comes in, we run through to the end of bar 32 to the repeat mark, and then go back to bar 17. Then we keep playing until we get to bar 29 again, but instead of playing these bars that are marked under the long line numbered 1, in other words the music we played first time around, we scoot straight through to what's known as the second time bar. So second time round we have bar 27, bar 28, and then straight through to the second time bar. Now there's nothing desperately complicated going on in this 3-4 section, but it does demand a little bit more dexterity than the first section, so you're going to need to practice it quite carefully. Separate hands practice is really going to help, and if I were you, I'd spend several practice sessions to start with just working on the hands separately. Aim for as much precision as you can in the left hand in particular, because you have a fair amount of jumping going on. There are no really massive jumps, but there's quite a lot of potential for small mistakes, so focus on being as precise as you can be. Notice also things like the slur marks in the left, so for example in bars 56 and 57. We mentioned slurring in the first tutorial, and the effect is a little bit more subtle here. Slur it. Yeah, but it's worth paying some attention to. In the right hand, I really want you to focus on making this melody sing out. Yeah, the whole section of the piece is very much about the melody in the right hand and the accompaniment in the left. So the challenge is to get the right balance between the two. Now that's not as simple as saying that the right should be louder than the left, although it might be just fractionally. It's much more about bringing out the clarity of this right hand and making sure the left isn't muddy and clunky in a way that might distract from the right. Now in some ways, getting that really right is about the hardest thing about this piece, yeah? So really work on the smoothness and the clarity and the phrasing in your right hand. Once again, separate hands practice will really help you here. A couple of other little things to mention before we talk about rubato and pedalling. First of all, pay close attention to the dynamics. Now in this 3-4 section there aren't any extremes. At one point in bar 41 we go up to F forte. which is loud, but it's not FF, it's not fortissimo, it's not very loud, so don't go crazy. We also have quite long hairpins in some places marking crescendi and decrescendi. Now I've written those in to test your control, because you really need to work hard to keep the process of getting louder or softer as steady and as regular as you can. A particular one to watch out for starts in the second time bar in bar 33 and goes all the way through to bar 38. It's this one. Okay, just before we hit that F in bar 41. Now the trick with gradual increases like that, and the reverse goes for, it's also true for gradual decreases as well. Don't get too big too quick. Instead, practice doing it steadily. You want a steady growth in the volume here. Okay, that's one of those things that's actually quite easy to overlook, and it isn't actually as straightforward as it seems, so practice it carefully. Okay, if you have to isolate those few bars and just practice the crescendo, you'll find that's really worth doing. You don't have to be, throughout the whole piece, you don't have to be absolutely religious about following the marked dynamics. I certainly wasn't when I played it through, and you can put your own interpretation on this. But with really obvious dynamics like that long crescendo, stick to playing it more or less as marked, because it's an important part of the piece. Another thing I'll mention now, because I know people will ask questions about it if I don't, is the way I've marked the fingering when we have single repeated notes in the left. So for example in bar 60, okay, we've got that repeated C in the left, okay, and I've marked the fingers 3, 2, 1, 3, 2, 1, 3, 2, 1. Why have I done that? Why not just use the same finger? Well, that is basically a standard technique in classical playing. Changing fingers when a note is repeated more than 2 or 3 times like that gives you greater clarity and control. If you stick with the same finger, you're having to lift off and put that back down, lift off and put back down, you're more likely to smudge it or play it unevenly. So doing that might look illogical, but it will give you a better sound. Okay, so now let's talk about the rubato and how you handle tempo in general in this section. We discussed rubato in tutorial number 1, but it's worth saying that rubato comes in lots of different forms, and the way you use it really depends on the musical context and what you're trying to achieve in terms of expression. So in the first part of the piece, I used a lot of rubato. It was really free and easy, there were lots of pauses, the beat was there, but I was really playing around with it. But when we get to this 3/4 section, things are different. The rubato should still be present, but when I was playing, you'll notice that I really reined it back. Yeah, there was a slight variation in the beat from time to time, but it was much more subtle. It was a little bit noticeable in 1 or 2 places, maybe around bar 46. I was kind of pulling the beat around a little bit there, but it was much tighter, much more subtle. So why did I change the way I was doing rubato, and how did I know that that was the right thing to do? Well, like I said, it comes down to context. There are 2 things. First of all, this waltz-like left hand suggests that we have more movement here, and also the allegretto marking suggests something that's a little bit tighter, a little bit more disciplined, and all of that in turn suggests a clearer beat. So by and large, that's what I stuck to, with just a little bit of rubato. Now towards the end, when we got back to the 2/2 time signature in bar 69, I let a little bit more rubato creep in, but maybe not quite as much as in the first section. And then I tightened up again just slightly for the very final bars in 3/4 time, from bar 73 onwards. Again, it's all about reading the context and making a musical decision. There's only one place where I've been really specific about changing the beat, and that's this ritenuto marking in bar 39. That's just telling us to slow down before returning to the normal tempo at the a-tempo marking in bar 41. Okay, quite a straightforward thing to do. Now, putting in that very kind of subtle rubato isn't easy. If I were you, I would start off by practicing the 3/4 section in quite strict time. Yeah, just treat it as a strict 3/4 beat. And then when you get confident with the actual notes, you can then begin to put the rubato in. So treat them as two separate problems. Master the actual notes and the standard timing first, and then when you're confident with it, then begin to play around with the beat, okay, and see what effect you can achieve. Finally, let's talk about the pedal, or rather the pedals, because you might want to use both in this piece. Now, I'm going to be talking about the sustain pedal on the right and the soft pedal on the left. Your piano might have 3 pedals like mine does. Ignore what's happening in the middle, because middle pedals can do a wide variety of things depending on the instrument you're playing. We're mainly interested in the right pedal and the left pedal, sustain and soft. We never call the sustain pedal the loud pedal, okay? That really is a beginner's mistake. Don't fall into that trap. Now, if you've been through my beginner's course, or if you've had piano lessons to a reasonable level, you'll know that the thing to do with the sustain pedal, the right hand pedal in a piece like this, is to use it to give fluidity and presence to the overall sound. So for example, it's going to really help to smooth out the jumps in the waltz section. If we played that without pedal, it would sound very different. It doesn't matter that there's no marking saying use the pedal. In Italian that would be con pedale, maybe shortened to con ped. An experienced piano player would look at this score and just know that it needed a sustain pedal, okay? So it doesn't matter that it's not marked. Now, using the sustain pedal demands a little bit of trial and error and judgment, because you'll find that its effects vary from piano to piano, sometimes quite dramatically, especially if you're using real pianos rather than digital ones. As a general rule of thumb, you need to avoid pedaling across chord changes, and a lot of pedaling at this level involves quickly lifting off your foot and re-pedaling so that you can maintain continuity in the sound. And often that amounts to what you might call half pedaling, or something close to half pedaling, which is where you don't really fully release the pedal at all, but just enough so that the dampers inside the piano touch the strings and kill off most of the resonance from the previous harmony, but without any real discernible break in the sound. It's kind of hard to describe, but you'll see what I mean if you experiment. Good quality digital pianos mimic that effect, often very well, but if you're on an older digital or a lower spec model, it might not. So it's a good idea, if you can have a play on a real piano from time to time, to do that and to learn about what the sustain pedal on a real piano actually does. On the subject of differences between pianos, they get even more stark when it comes to the left hand pedal, soft pedal. Now, in an upright piano, the soft pedal moves all of the hammers inside the piano closer to the strings, and that doesn't make the piano quieter as such, but it makes it easier to play quietly and often gives you a greater touch sensitivity, and that can be really handy in delicate sections like the ones we've got towards the end of this piece. If you're working on an upright or a good quality digital, again, it's worth experimenting with the soft pedal to find out what effects you can achieve. It really varies from piano to piano, maybe even more than the effect of the sustain pedal does. It's something that you really have to try for yourself. I should say, if you're lucky enough to be playing on a grand piano, then the soft pedal does something different again. What happens when you press the soft pedal on a grand piano is that it shifts the whole mechanism of the piano, usually including the keyboard. It does that because if you look inside any piano, you'll see that each note has more than one string. There's usually 2 or 3 strings per note. So when you press the soft pedal on a grand piano, what it does is move the mechanism so that only one of those strings is being hit. Now, it's from this mechanism in grand pianos that we get the traditional score marking for pedal, which is una corda. That's just the Italian phrase meaning one string, okay? And the effect of that is that there's no difference in sensitivity as there is in an upright piano, but it does make the instrument physically, if you like, quieter. It will just be softer. Una corda, by the way, is a marking you don't see very often. You will sometimes in really quiet sections, but again, use that soft pedal at your discretion, especially if you want to achieve very delicate, very quiet effects. Play around and see what your piano will do. Okay, so that's it for this second tutorial in the series. If you're wondering how long it will take you to master this piece, then I would allow at least a couple of weeks of regular practice to get it to a good standard, and probably more. If sticking the whole thing together and being able to play it fluently takes 6 or even 8 weeks, then that's no problem at all, because you'll be developing your skills throughout that whole process. So be patient and stick with it. Remember to practice your scales and exercises as well, because we're going to be looking at those in detail in the next tutorial in the series. In the meantime, if you have any questions, stick them in the comment thread underneath this video, or ask me on Patreon if you support me on there. And also, please don't forget to check out my books. There are links to the sales pages for all of my individual books in the description text below this video, along with links to all of my social media accounts, Facebook, Twitter and Instagram. Happy playing, and I'll see you next time.